This is Dr. Rodriguez for Psych 101. We are on Chapter 3. Make sure you have your blank outline out and you're adding the extra notes to it. Biopsychology is the branch of psychology that looks to biological mechanisms that underlie our behavior. It looks at genetics, so our genetic codes, our DNA. It looks at the nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. And it looks at the endocrine system, the glands and the hormones that can influence behavior. Let's start off by looking at genetics. So our genetics can influence how we think and how we behave. When we are talking about genetics, Darwin's name is going to come up, right? Darwin's theory of evolution, the whole survival of the fittest, that the genetic variation in human beings that happens from different gene mutations is what is responsible for our natural selection. Those people that have the genetic mutations or have the genes that are best suited for the environment tend to survive and tend to reproduce. So genetics and behavior. Now, genetics is a topic that is not always covered in this biopsychology chapter. It is sometimes covered in the human development chapter. And so we're not going to spend too much time on it in this chapter, but I do want to touch on the influence of genetics on behavior. Okay, so we get 23 chromosomes from our mom, right, from mom's egg, 23 chromosomes from dad, from the sperm, right, and those combine to make 46 chromosome zygote, or a fertilized egg that 38 to 40 weeks later will turn into a baby. Now, what does that mean? You have 23 chromosomes. What's chromosomes? Chromosomes are a string of DNA. DNA are little pieces of instructions, and when you combine these instructions, you make a gene, right? A gene is a segment of chromosome that says, hey, you should have, blue eyes. So a chromosome is the string of DNA. I think of it like if I was to take a piece of my hair and it's curly, 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 that is a chromosome, all right? My curl is the chromosome. So it's a great big curly, 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 and that curly, curly, curly is made up of a bunch of DNA. Now, if I take out one little curl, one section of that curly, 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 curly piece, then that is a gene, and that gives instructions about a characteristic, or multiple genes give instructions about maybe intelligence, maybe eye color, maybe a little bit about personality. So chromosomes are the curly, curly, curlies. It's the string of DNA up here. And a portion of that chromosome is a gene that has instructions about different characteristics. So when we're talking about genes, we need to, you might hear the term genotype and phenotype. Genotype means our genetic instructions. So we get half from mom, half from dad. So maybe we get one gene or one allele from mom that says that we should have brown eyes. We get one allele from dad that says that we should have blue eyes. Now, these will, inside of us, what ends up happening, our genotype says that we should have this, we're carrying brown and we're carrying blue eye instructions. Because you have different dominant recessive alleles, brown is the more dominant one. So you'll end up having the phenotype, the actual, what you physically see will be brown eyes, because brown eyes are more dominant. So genotype refers to what's in your genes, what's in the instructions. Phenotype refers to what physically you will see on the outside, what manifests. All right, so you have your genes that are all those instructions, right? Your genotype. Phenotype is what actually manifests, and dominant versus recessive alleles play a factor. Brown eyes versus blue eyes. Brown is more dominant, so you're going to end up seeing on the outside the phenotype is going to be brown. Epigenetics refers to how you have your genes, but your genes aren't everything that determines what happens, what manifests with you. The environment can also play a role. So epigenetics refers to on top of genetics. So like you have your instructions, but the environment can tell these genes to turn on or turn off. So let's take intelligence, for example. Let's say you have the genotype for very high intelligence. It's written in your genes. You have this genotype for very high intelligence. It's written in your genes, but maybe you're in a household where you experience a lot of abuse and neglect. So although you have the genotype, the instructions within your genes to have high intelligence, because of the environment is not very encouraging, it's not conducive to that high intelligence, then you end up having the phenotype. What actually physically manifests is you not having a very high intelligence. So genotype, your genetic instructions, is not everything. Our environment plays a role in whether certain genes turn on or turn off. All right, that's referred to as epigenetics. So genes can play a role in not only physical traits like blue eyes or brown eyes, but it also plays a role in behavior, like I was talking about with intelligence or temperament, is our early personality or sexual orientation. There's some research to suggest that sexual orientation might have a genetic component to it. So genes play a role not only in our physical characteristics, but also in our behavior. So that's the first biological mechanism that I wanted to talk about that underlies behavior. Let's go on and talk about the nervous system, another biological aspect of us that can determine how we behave. All right, so the nervous system refers to all these cells in our bodies that are, we can consider them a communication system. It tells our body what we should be doing. And so neurons are at the core of every behavior, that every time that we move our body, every time that we talk, neurons are responsible for these behaviors. So the cells of the nervous system, neurons are the cells of the nervous system, the basic building block of behavior of our nervous system. So you have glial cells and you have neurons, all right? And glial cells play a supportive role to neurons. There are a lot more glial cells in our body than there are neurons, but they're very important because they support neurons. Neurons are the cells that we can call them our communication cells. They tell us what we should be doing. They tell our different parts of our body what we should be doing. So you have the different structures or different parts of a neuron is the soma. Now, anytime that you see the word soma, it means body. Soma means body. So soma is the part, so here's a neuron right here. Soma is the body part of the neuron, okay? And you have the dendrite. The dendrite are these like little finger, they look like little fingers coming off of the soma, the body, all right? The dendrite is where messages come in from other cells, all right? So messages go through our body through neurons. And they go through our body and they travel through neurons, through electricity, and between neurons through chemicals, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so you have these dendrites, messages go into the dendrites. So the way I remember dendrite is it's the right way. It's the right way for messages to go in. Dendrite, right way for them to go in. And then they go into the soma, the body, the cell body, and then they go down the axon, and around the axon is a myelin sheath. It's a fatty substance that coats our axons and allows the messages to speed up. Now, during infancy and infancy and teen years, a lot of myelination will happen. A lot of speeding up of messages occurs, and that's why you can see how during teen years, during early development, child development, little ones' brains are just improving so much. And a lot of that has to do with myelination because it allows those messages to zoom right through that axon. All right. So it goes in through the dendrite, Message goes in through the dendrite, goes through the soma, goes down the axon, all the way down to the terminal buttons. The terminal buttons are where these messages will change from electricity. So messages are going zzz, electricity down to this terminal button. And to get over to another neuron, okay, so another neuron over here, neurons don't touch, so there's a little bit of a space. It's called a synaptic gap. There's a little bit of like, it's like a river or a body of water. So neurons are kind of like floating, and then there's another neuron over here. Now to get messages to go from this neuron over to the next neuron, so it goes zzz, electrical current, zzz, and to get it over to this other neuron, you have to get over this like synaptic gap. This fluid. And how that happens is the message goes, gets down here to the terminal button, and in this terminal button are some like little holes, vesicles, synaptic vesicles that have neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that tell the next neuron if it should get excited or if it should calm down. So gets down to the terminal button, that electrical signal, and what happens is that a neurotransmitter will get released into the synaptic gap and get sucked up into or fits into the dendrite of the next neuron. So neural communication is electrochemical. It's electrical within the neuron. So I keep on going. So imagine electrical current going through the neuron, gets down here. And to get to the next neuron, there's going to be that chemical exchange. That chemical exchange is a neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter gets released from this terminal button and will fit like a puzzle piece into the dendrite of the next neuron. So neurons don't kind of sort of fire. They either totally fire or they're just sitting there waiting to fire. All right. So resting potential is when a neuron is stretched out like a rubber band waiting to spring. Now, when a dendrite receives a neurotransmitter that says, hey, go ahead and spring, spring into action, then there's this action potential. So this threshold of excitement sends the electrical signal all the way down to the axon terminal or the terminal button. Axon terminal button, same thing. All right, so resting potential is when the neuron is kind of sitting there stretched out and ready to spring. Action potential is when the neurotransmitter tells it, okay, you're ready to go. And it will send that message down through. And then I said the neurotransmitter is that, once the electrical message gets down here, to get it over to the next neuron is going to have to release a neurotransmitter, or a chemical is released into that synaptic gap, or synapse or synaptic cleft. All the same thing, all right? It's just the gap between the neurons. And it'll fit into the receptor. So here's the receptor. See, here's the there's one neuron, the terminal button. Here's the neurotransmitter. It's going to get released, go into that synaptic gap, and it's going to fit into the dendrite. It's going to fit into the receptor on the next neuron, onto the dendrite of the next neuron, all right? Now, reuptake occurs when the neurotransmitter gets released and it fits into the dendrite of the next neuron and tells it to get excited or to calm down. Reuptake is like a vacuuming up of the leftover transmitters. All right. Now, an SSRI, like Zoloft, is an antidepressant. It's serotonin reuptake inhibitor, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And what that does is it allows the serotonin, feel-good neurotransmitter, to stay in the synaptic gap longer, to be able to fit into these receptors longer. And that's what's responsible for making us feel good, because it doesn't get sucked back up so fast. So Here is the terminal button, one neuron, the end of one neuron, neurotransmitter is getting released, and it's going to go through the synaptic gap and fit in like a puzzle piece into certain receptors on the next neuron in the dendrite and tell that next neuron to get excited or to calm down.